really great to have you with us, Estelle, to talk about your commission as part of this year's Chester Bandstand programme. So the first question is, how have you found lockdown, and what's the impact of lockdown been on your creativity?
Well, yeah, great to be with you as well, Luke, and thanks very much for the commission. It's really exciting. So lockdown, initially I was in Chester and I was struggling a lot because I was in a house by myself. My work commitments stopped and I found it difficult. So I isolated for a little while and came back home to the farm. And since I've been here, I feel like it's been really therapeutic, being in nature, just being able to have nice walks outside every day, fetching the cows up, and being around family. So it's actually been quite nice, to be honest. I mean, it's been difficult seeing everything that's been going on, obviously, and hearing the news and the deaths, and I've been so kind of cautious about going out wearing a mask to the supermarket because I'm living with someone who's very vulnerable. So, you know, life's not been normal, but I think I'm a lot luckier than many people who haven't got this kind of space, you know, people who are stuck in a little flat without any outdoor space. So in that respect, it's been great for me.
It's fantastic. Have you found that you've been more creative during this time and you've produced more work, or you've been more inspired by other things?
Yeah, I mean, I've been quite inspired by the pandemic itself. So initially, I made a couple of masks when I was back in Chester, just as a way to kind of process what was going on and all the different things I was seeing. But then since I got this commission, that ramped up a lot, and I started thinking about things a lot more. And I've been really creative since I started working on this, so it's been really beneficial to me.
Great, really glad to hear it. So in terms of the impact on the creativity, the commission's been maybe a focal point of your reaction as an artist to COVID. I'm just wondering what inspired you to do the masks specifically rather than a different type of artwork?
Well, it was a direct relation to the pandemic itself. So going out and seeing people wearing these masks and how odd it was, but how it was the new normal. And what my initial thoughts were, the first mask I made was covered in moss. And I did another one with feathers, and I did a butterfly one. And I was thinking about our relationship to nature and how everyone was suddenly indoors. No one was driving around. The planet was kind of breathing and thriving a lot more. And it made me sort of start to question our relationship to nature and whether this pandemic was nature's way of almost retaliating and showing us to slow down. And those were my initial thought processes.
I think it's really interesting, the sense of conflict. So you've talked about the kind of peace and harmony of being able to relax where you are, but still having obviously the threat of COVID hanging over when you go to the supermarket and so on. I wonder, has that maybe been a catalyst for exploring similar themes in the future, or do you think you might revisit this in 12 months and with a fresh pair of eyes?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I would like to continue with the masks and see where it takes me and see if it develops into another piece of work that's maybe not on a mask. I'm not really sure. It's hard to say how a piece of work will develop. Work often, for me, it develops during the making process and when you're thinking about these ideas. You might set out to do one thing and it'll turn into something completely different. And this has been quite surprising for me, sticking with a theme. I'm not very good at just sticking to one thing, but this has been quite helpful.
Great. Fantastic. Well, we've got the images of the masks that you've kindly sent over, and you're modelling these on the photos. So I'll be putting those up on the screen just now. and they're going to be made available online for everyone to have a look at. And I think we'll do a montage as part of the virtual bandstand for this year, which replaces the in-person events. I noticed there's a huge variety in terms of the colour, the shape and the sizes of the flowers. I just wonder, how much have you applied the meaning of each flower, or what inspired your choice for each particular plant you've used?
Yeah, so I was very much driven by the meaning within the flowers rather than the way they looked. So, for example, I've picked a few here. So I used, I don't know if you can see that very well, but this is a dandelion clock. I made a mask full of these, and it's incredibly fragile, and it's got sort of a lot of childhood memories for me of like blowing on a dandelion and making a wish and seeing all these seeds flying around everywhere. And for me, this almost represented this kind of invisible virus spreading around. Like, you see these dandelion seeds, and it had a kind of relationship to that for me, because it's this really delicate, ephemeral thing that you don't really notice spreading, much like a weed that you perhaps don't want in your garden. So that was a significant one. Buttercups. Again, as a child, these are quite a sort of, like, did anyone ever hold a buttercup to your face?
Do you like butter? Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it was that kind of nostalgic thing again with that one, and the idea of having it on your face and on a mask, and there's something very beautiful about the colour. The forget-me-nots, I found a big bunch of forget-me-nots a few weeks back, and for me that just signifies remembrance, and watching the news and seeing the figures increase every day. And then having them on a mask, for me, that was quite poignant in that respect. What else have I got? I picked some chamomile flowers and some lavender. And I'm quite into sort of aromatherapy and what plants can do for the body. So, like, lavender and chamomile are notoriously very calming plants, and I thought having those on a mask during this time was quite significant in that sense. Everyone's feeling this sense of unease, so that was my thinking behind that one. I did another one that was covered in chive flowers, and it also had a few red onion skins on it. And ever since I was young, my mum would always give me like onions or garlic for a cold. And obviously with the virus, that just seemed like an obvious choice for a mask as well. There was another one covered in oak leaves. And the village where I'm from is called Acton, and that derives from, it used to be called Oak Town because of all the oak trees. And as soon as I see oak trees and acorns, it reminds me of home and being at home. And obviously everyone's been at home for the last few months. And I think there was another one covered in clover leaves, and I remember as a little girl like searching through fields trying to find like the lucky 4-leaf clover. I actually found one the other day.
Oh wow.
You see?
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah.
I know.
I've never seen one, by the way, apart from in occasionally jewellery. So like pendants with a 4-leaf clover. And I'm always convinced that they've just taken a spare leaf off a 3-leaf and glued that on. But, wow.
Yeah. So my thinking behind the clover mask was to do with luck, and the idea of when you wear a mask, when you go out, you almost feel like you're, a little bit lucky because you think, well, I'm a bit more protected, so I'm lucky because, I don't know, that was sort of my thoughts behind that one.
Like a sense of good fortune.
Yeah.
Almost self-made fortune by wearing something which is protective.
I think so. Just psychologically, you feel more protected and like you'll be a little bit luckier.
Yeah.
And I think finally there was another one covered in a variety of wildflowers, and I called it Rainbow Meadow.
Yeah.
And that was just a nod to all the rainbows that we've seen around for the NHS and the key workers.
Yeah, that's nice. And I mean, a lot of this sounds like it's deeply rooted in your own personal journey and your own like childhood, for example. So maybe the last time we felt this vulnerable might have been as children.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a sort of link or an overlap to that mindset over the pandemic?
Never really thought about that, but I suppose living back with parents and family, it has been a lot like going back to my childhood. So in a way, yeah, there's definitely been a lot more vulnerability, and that feeling of not wanting to leave the house and go anywhere for fear of catching something. I suppose, yeah, in a way, it is going back to childhood in that respect.
Yeah. A strange circle, I think. And on a slightly more positive note, maybe, but these the reaction that these have got when I've shown them to one or two other people has been really positive, and they've all thought they're absolutely stunning. And actually, the message that's there is really comes through, very poignant. And I wonder, how would somebody go about making their own from their own wildflowers nearby?
Well, what my process is, I bought some masks like this, and yeah, you would just go around and gather whatever it was that you wanted to use, and with wildflowers, they're going to die very quickly, so you have to pick them and then use them straight away and then photograph. So, for example, this chive flower, I'd take the stem off, and then what I've been using is this Bostik glue, and basically dab a little bit of that on, stick it onto your mask, and keep going until the whole thing's covered. It uses a lot more than you think it will. They've been quite densely packed with flowers and materials, just to fill all the little gaps. When you have gaps showing through, it doesn't look as good, in my opinion. So yeah, it uses a lot of materials.
So is it quite heavy once you've finished then? Some of these that we're looking at here.
Sometimes they can be, and it does slip around on the face, but I'll only wear it for 5 minutes and try and take a good photograph. And then it ends up in the bin pretty quickly because they don't last.
Are these not things that could be pressed in any way, or do they lose a little bit of?
Yeah, you can press flowers, but they dry up and they lose that kind of three-dimensionality, and they lose the freshness. And I just think for a photograph, why not use a fresh flower? Yeah. I mean, for example, like this four-leaf cloverleaf, that's been pressed. I mean, you probably can't see the.
Okay.
I mean, the colour's different, and just the shape, and I don't know. There's something a bit lifeless about this one, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it lacks a little bit of depth, maybe from. Yeah. Oh, fascinating. And I was going to ask. Also, I mean. We've talked briefly about how this relates to maybe some of the work you could revisit, or how it's a very organic process in a very literal sense in this case. But I wonder what your future plans are. Things seem to be easing off at the moment, but we don't know what's just around the corner. So how's that looking for you as an artist?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I don't have anything in particular coming up. I would like to continue with the masks if I feel inspired to do so. I'm going to finish this bumblebee one today and see how that looks. I've been trying to catch some flies because I'd like to do a fly mask. I don't want it to all be, pretty wild flowers. A lot of my work's quite dark, and I like to kind of shock people. I like to draw them in, and then I like to discuss them. Like on my master's, I was quite interested in the idea of attraction and repulsion in work. So I'd like to maybe go down the route of using insects and seeing, both the beauty and the disgust of the idea of having them really close to the face. But yeah, I mean, apart from this, I haven't really got any other ideas of where my work's progressing at the moment, if I'm being honest.
Maybe that's quite a nice thing, actually. I can only speak for myself, but just having the little bit of time after the initial panic that all the work had disappeared has been quite refreshing, and an opportunity to regroup and have a think about objectives as a creative person and what the career path looks like. So it's been nice that people haven't necessarily felt pressured to need to do things.
For sure, yeah. It has been nice having, completely all the pressures off. And with my other part-time work, I've felt a lot freer to be creative. Like, my mind's just, it's allowed me to fully immerse myself, whereas usually I'd be, dashing from one little job to another, and the creative side of it sometimes slips. But this has been really nice and not pressured at all.
Nice. I was just going to touch on, you talked about attraction and repulsion as one of the themes that comes up quite often. And I've got very fond memories of seeing you do a live art thing at Telford's warehouse in Chester. And I mentioned this on a phone call earlier to the council, talking about the fact we were catching up and doing this today. I remember fish fingers in a shopping trolley, and I remember a clarinet in a separate piece, all in 15 quite magical minutes, actually. And I wonder whether any of the things that you worked on at that stage have kind of come through, or how your artwork has developed, and now you're in this position where you're making these. Is there a link? It's a horrible question, by the way. Sorry.
For those particular pieces of work, I don't think. The trolley. That was a one-off thing.
It's the bird's eye fish fingers that were, and there was a little stick man with a. I mean, it was consumerism and fisheries.
It was in relation to Telford's warehouse, and I suppose, the trolley came out of the canal by Telford's, and I don't know, it was, a humorous little playful piece of work. And the piece with the clarinet and the post-it notes falling to the floor, I remember that piece fondly. I'd never really developed that, but a few years later I started doing sound sculptures. So it wasn't musical instruments as such, it was more I would go out and record different environmental sounds and think of ways to combine them with objects. And often these were natural sounds and objects, and ways of merging like the visual and the sonic side of things together. That was quite interesting. But I mean, fundamentally, I think I'm always drawn to materials, and especially natural materials. My work always seems to come back to that, even when I dabble in other areas, performance and music and things. I'm very much drawn to objects and nature.
Nice. Well, I'd just close off this really by saying thanks so much for producing some stunning work. It's been a real experimental effort this year. It was pretty obvious early on that the bandstand live performances couldn't happen, and it was the right choice to move away from that. And it's been great to have your commission as part of 5 that we've managed to fund for this year. So deeply grateful for that. What to do with the programme is expand it beyond music. And we've actually had a visual artist do some work, a visual artist called Emma Lloyd, and she's used the bandstand as a time-based canvas for 1 or 2 afternoons in the last couple of years. I wonder if maybe something like this could work there as another art installation, maybe a future performance. People could get involved.
Yeah, it's a possibility. I'd have to think about how it can work in the space. I'd be interested to see exactly what Emma did in the space and how she used it. So obviously, it's difficult working outdoors and in a very specific site. But you know, I do like a challenge.
Yeah, why not? Well, you've certainly risen to this one. Really deeply grateful, and thanks again, Estelle.
Yeah, thanks very much, Luke.